Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Much before the birth of spoken language and the invention of written script, it was pictures that narrated the story that united the community. Colorful images describing the hunt or food collecting from the walls of prehistoric caves in Bhimbedka bear testimony to this. With the march of civilization, much changed, but pictures continued to hold their own and were considered an important means of communication. It has been well said that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. An important stage of evolution of visual communication was the advent of cinema and moving images. Pictures suddenly came alive and became spellbinding. The silent movies in India had patriotic fervor and dealt with the themes of social reforms. When sound was introduced, the impact of this medium was enhanced dramatically. Once again, many of the pioneers in the field focused on nationalism and social justice. The films made during the freedom struggle and in the immediate aftermath of independence mirrored the mood of the Indian people and gave voice to their dreams of democratic self-rule. The stories dealt with themes of common interest like the ills of caste system, rural indebtedness, feudal exploitation, and the conflict between the small peasant and oppressive industrialization. In South India, almost all the leaders of the Dravid social reform movement were professionals in the film world. They used the medium to communicate effortlessly with the masses, transcending the barrier of literacy. Annadurai, M.G. Ramachandran, and Karunanidhi used films brilliantly for their cause. In Andhra Pradesh, N.T. Rama Rao did the same. He performed mythological roles symbolizing the victory of good over evil and as a savior of the poor. The audiovisual media captured the hearts and the minds of the masses immediately and more effectively than the print. For most people today, electronic medium is synonymous with television. The present generation is also largely unaware of the advent and evolution of television in India. It was the visionary space scientist Vikram Sarabhai who foresaw the potential of this medium for education and development. Experimental telecast called SIGHT began under the umbrella of ISRO. Project SIGHT was implemented in the most backward areas of 6 states. The states selected in the initial phase were Rajasthan, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. Community viewing was arranged through clusters of villages of 2,000 viewers each.
Television began in 1959, 15 September 59, and it used to be a weekly broadcast. Weekly broadcast for 45 minutes for teleclubs opened by the government, so that get some feedback from there. Gradually, the duration increased and school TV started and like that. So we came to about 2 hours a day. Basically, programming was social messages and related to in an interesting manner. News came later on in 67, 68.
Later, news and current affairs along with agricultural extension programs were broadcast from Doordarshan Kendra, Delhi. Krishi Darshan became one of the most popular programs watched widely in the countryside and is considered to be the harbinger of the Green Revolution. It played a significant role in changing mindset of the tradition-bound villagers and made them receptive to new scientific practices. Such was the impact of the visuals that radio was viewed as a medium of past. Newsreaders and announcers were glamorized as film stars and became instant celebrities. Doordarshan, the younger sister of radio, lost no time in taking giant steps. Soon enough, it held a wide viewership in thrall. As years passed, a string of low-powered transmitters relayed the telecast from the capital, and regional Doordarshan Kendras were set up. For the first time, the entire nation could watch the Republic Day parade or a cricket match together. Share as eyewitnesses the joys and sorrows in life of the young nation. A sense of participation in building democracy was effortlessly forged. Color television came to India along with the Asian Games and revolutionized viewership. Multi-hued entertainment assumed a new dimension. It wasn't long before, following in the footsteps of sports, serials and soap operas made their debut. Doordarshan as a public broadcaster was conscious of its responsibilities, and serials like Hum Log and Bunyad communicated a strong social message. Mythological spectacles, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, harked back to a glorious past, while Tamas courageously raised disturbing questions about communalism. Bharat Ek Khoj, based on the classic work by Jawaharlal Nehru, celebrated the resplendent diversity of our land. Other programs introduced in the wake of the advent of color focused on folk arts and crafts and healthy entertainment for the whole family with substantial educational content. All of them encouraged national integration. Cable TV came to India at the time of the Gulf War that was enabling people to watch worldwide events at home in real time. Satellite transmission followed soon after and knit the nation together even more closely. Next milestone was reached when India launched INSAT, a communication satellite that had a footprint covering the entire subcontinent. Private channels were allowed to enter when economic reforms were ushered in and the era of liberalization began. The technological revolution in the field of electronics has transformed the ways of gathering and disseminating news. The skills required are very different from print medium and even films. All the work seems to be done in a pressure cooker syndrome. 24-hour coverage generates immense pressure for the content creation. The newsroom is crowded with young faces, enthusiastic but not always experienced. The role of the reporter and editor are merging into that of the anchor who, accompanied by the camera person, is deployed on the spot where news is breaking. This lends greater urgency and topicality to the coverage.
खाद्य मंत्री का दावा है कि प्रस्तावित खाद्य सुरक्षा कानून को लागू करने के लिए
Earlier, the image of a reporter or an editor or even an anchor was that of a responsible elder. Credibility of what he or she said depended a lot on the appearance. Today, hardly a middle-aged face survives for long in front of the camera. It is believed that the large mass of young relates much better to appear of their own age. What cannot be denied that despite the cosmetic changes, electronic media has been in the forefront of many a battle for the democratic rights of the people.
And in breaking news,
Breaking news, however great, is dealt with a light touch and at times with little sensitivity and sufficient restraint. This has given rise to criticism that television is a medium that necessarily trivializes and sensationalizes news, leaving very little time for reflection and analysis.
This is the age of instant. See, everything is instant. Television has actually changed public taste and perception in a big way because they give the news and analysis instantly.
It is now visual media, their impact is far greater, and it is 24/7, so it is on hot trail all the time. I think the problem really is that anything, you don't have really time, you're committed to the position you take and the first reaction. And most people will find it very difficult then to retract that position and say no new evidence has come and therefore I change my position. And I think this idea of not just disseminating information but actually getting people to form opinions at the first possible visual that has come up.
Electronic media by its very nature performs the role at the moment certainly of a first information report. It's an FIR. कि ये खबर आई है, you immediately report it.
Instant electronic journalism is not without its values.
There was an attempt by somebody who is a Muslim who tried to create communal disturbance. A fleet of the cars rushed there. Within 15 minutes, there were cameras and all those persons fade away. So that is the power of media. So we must see the positive side of electronic media, which we have been, because of the fast delivery, there may be certain mistakes. But by and large, we are serving a greater cause to strengthen this democracy.
As the first reports from
The coverage of natural calamities and disasters in television has greatly facilitated the relief and rehabilitation work.
और फिलहाल इन लोगों को जो कुछ सहायता मिल रही है वो सेना की तरफ से। दूरदर्शन समाचार, श्रीनगर।
Those who have survived are learning to pick up bits of their life.
Vying with each other to be the first with breaking news, the camera persons and anchors have often helped the entire nation to unite in response to cope with the crisis.
And with the sensationalization of news, for instance, without wanting to comment on the merits of the case, whether it is Anna Hazare or Baba Ramdev, for those days, if you tuned into the channels and to many of the newspapers, you'd think that nothing else is happening in the world. This is the only thing.
Television in recent times has been accused of blowing events out of proportion, hijacking political agenda, and at times encouraging anarchy. It is the ever-vigilant electronic media that keeps the politician on their toes. They are forced to explain their positions and conduct. Media makes them truly accountable to the people.
The media is almost entirely fixated on politicians and corruption of politicians, which is certainly there and it's an issue that is worth taking up. But surely there is as much corruption in the corporate sector because from where is this money coming that supposedly the politicians are, it is obviously coming from the business-driven model of growth that we have now adopted over the past 20 years.
It is the corporate sector that has actively promoted the spread of consumerism. This has seriously eroded shared social values.
Most of the channels are reporting Metro India. Shining India is being reported. Some essential news, often sensational. After the news, what comes? Some films. Some of them are sponsored programs. Many of them are paid. Then it will be cricket. Then it will come whether Shah Rukh Khan or Salman have sneezed or not. What about the rest of the country? Chunk of the country in on the TV channel as well as in the print media, in the major papers, gets unreported.
Deep in the interiors of this remote and rarely visited village,
Perhaps it is unfair to blame the television channels for imbalanced coverage, favoring the cities all the time, many a time. Correspondents in electronic media have risked their life and limb to report from disturbed areas.
two sides to the same coin, in fact. The ordinary Kashmiri likes to say that he's caught between the barrel of two guns, the militants on the one hand and the security forces on the other. But the security forces too are hapless victims of brutal violence.
They have not only covered rioting and loss of life, but also enabled a people alienated from the national mainstream to express their grievances. The voices, even if raised in anger and sorrow, have greatly helped bridge the emotional distance between those who reside on the periphery and the center. This has contributed substantially towards restoring the credibility of our democracy. Long ago, before the advent of television, it was radio that brought home information and entertainment to the masses. The wireless sets and the transistors bridged time and space miraculously. Radio transcended the literacy barrier and enjoyed great credibility as the official source of news. This was when newsreaders, commentators and producers enjoyed larger-than-life iconic stature. Melville DeMello, Devkinandan Pandey and Jasdev Singh are only a few of those immortal voices. Eyewitness accounts of all major events were conveyed through evocative word pictures. The listeners experienced together the agony and ecstasy of unfolding events, and none can deny the role played by radio in emotional integration of India.
Greatest achievements of both these organizations has been somehow able to preserve the heritage, especially our classical heritage. Now, classical music, for example, you don't see it anywhere in any commercial channel. Radio is keeping that art alive.
Television's popularity seemed to sound the death knell of radio.
Yeah, and welcome to another round of Matchless Music Hour, brought to you by 102.6 AIR FM.
It surprised many when radio arose phoenix-like in its immensely popular FM avatar. When it was decided by the government to allow private players in the field, it literally allowed 100 flowers to bloom.
Until the middle of the 90s, a small country like Nepal had more FM radio stations than India. Today we have 250 FM radio stations. This number will go up to 1,200 in the coming 5 years.
What is even more remarkable in the context of democracy is the proliferation of community radio.
Namaste Pastapur. Pastapuru, Hyderabad ku 100 kilometers.
Villagers in different parts of the country, particularly women, have adopted and adapted citizens' radio as an effective channel to express their aspirations as well as grievances. Community radio has given the users a great sense of empowerment. Programs are planned and produced with the listeners, members of the community. Villagers graduate from handling the humble portable cassette recorder to operating sound mixers and broadcast equipment. Running a community radio station with regular transmission requires inclusive, democratic management. Nothing can match the satisfaction of self-esteem gained after technology has been demystified and mastered. The people engaged in community radio movement are confident that the voice of the people can't be silenced or stifled once it's broadcast. Community radio is essentially a democratic medium of communication, as it encourages participation and involvement of listeners striving to engage in a two-way communication. The emergence of new forms of communication based on the internet like Twitter and Facebook has given birth to what is referred to as new media or social media.
Even though historically media has been important in sustaining a democratic dialogue, it's really been controlled by very few people. If you could characterize them in three ways, when the state had the absolute monopoly on information, that was a one-to-many medium. When that moved into a larger number of people, newspapers, etc., it became a few to many. Really what we see now with social media is a many to many, right? So you have many more people actively involved in the ownership and in the participation of this fourth pillar, which can only make the pillar a lot stronger.
This has given birth to a whole set of complex issues related to freedom of expression, regulation, and control.
The right that we have for free speech is a constitutional right, it is not a government given right.
We are dissolving certain kinds of boundaries. And one boundary we are dissolving is that between private speech and what is called broadcast, public speech.
Recent events in the Arab world, popularly known as the Arab Spring, have shown that the emerging electronic media has constantly outpaced television.
Began chanting from the Mediterranean coast, wearing his trademark. His people wanted us to see that Gaddafi is not.
It is not always possible to deploy production crew in time. Censorship by totalitarian regimes makes the task of professional journalists even more difficult.
Visions can be seen on the streets here in the capital.
It is in this context that media like Facebook and Twitter, blogs and mobile MMSs become the primary source of news. India cannot remain untouched by emerging trends in technology and society.
The explosion in the number of mobile telephones in this country means that there's going to be an entire generation of people who might start accessing the internet using a handheld device. More and more people are starting getting information on mobile phones. The internet may reach out to a very small section of people at present. There might be a huge digital divide, but there's every reason to believe that this will possibly be one of the fastest growing forms of the mass media in the foreseeable future.
In recent years, electronic media in various Indian languages has been particularly active. Regional channels have proliferated with great pace. With increasing competition, a greater diversity of opinions is encountered and journalistic standards have improved.
And I think overall balance tells you that the more competition there is, the better the chances that you can still get good journalism coming out. And I see this happening on television. Many of the local televisions, particularly those started by political parties, do not have that credibility as those who refuse to be partisan in an overtly ideological manner.
The relationship between audiovisual media and print too has been discussed in depth.
So with the competition, even the print media in India has grown tremendously. Tremendously it has grown. TV has also grown. Virtual media has also grown. So a population of 120 crore, let's not think about that in 5 years' time the print will disappear, or the TV will disappear and the virtual world will take over. All three will exist, will survive, will complement each other, and will compete with each other.
Many scoops and stings have exposed scams and scandals involving not only politicians and bureaucrats, but also members of the higher judiciary and generals in the armed forces.
Welcome to the special show, The Adarsh Fallout.
He has been convicted by the General Court Martial.
At times, the coverage has been sensational and has inflamed passions. The issue of media trials has understandably engendered great heat.
For example, in America, the O.J. Simpson case, well, the general impression was that trial had become a soap opera, and it was believed by reasonable people that the ultimate outcome was affected by the media trial. All that you need to do, or you are entitled to do, is to report what transpired at a hearing and not mix it with your opinion, not give it a tilt, and not prejudge the issue.
While media insists that it has only done what is its right and duty, there is no general agreement and the debate rages on.
Media is something that has enriched Indian democracy. It has emerged as a check and balance on the misuse of power and has justified the term that it is the fourth pillar of Indian democracy.
Freedom of expression is the lifeblood of democracy. At the same time, it has to be considered that this cannot be an unfettered right. On the balance, it has acted responsibly and strengthened the fabric of our democratic life. It has given voice to the silent majority who earlier had no opportunity to express their opinions and articulate their aspirations.